All right, so this is a Chapter 1 practice problem, all right? And this problem is also, I think, found in your Chapter 1 homework. So that's part of the reason why I selected this problem. But also, there are a couple of interesting things going on in this problem. So let's get rolling. So we've got this person's song, and they earn $100,000 taxable income, okay? And they're taxed at an average tax rate of 20%. So that tells us that on $100,000 of taxable income, they pay $20,000 of tax, okay? Now, Congress is going to increase the income tax rate, all right, and make their average tax rate go up from 20% to 25%, all right? So the question is, how much more income tax will she pay, assuming that the income effect is descriptive? And then, follow-on question, what effect will this tax rate change have on the tax base and the tax collected, all right? First, let's deal with this income effect question, all right? So what is the income effect? Well, in tax theory, I guess, you have the income effect versus the substitution effect, all right? And the income effect says if I earn $70,000 after tax, that is what I need to live. All right? And so the income tax or the income effect says I need $70,000 to live, no matter what Congress does to tax rates, even as tax rates increase, I will work so that I earn $70,000 after taxes. So no matter how much you tax me, I need $70,000 after tax to pay for my house, to feed my kids, whatever it is. And so I'm going to work and work and work to make sure I get $70,000 after taxes. Now, the substitution effect says something different. The substitution effect says at a point, I would rather not have something than work more. So the substitution effect says at a point, and it's different for everyone. At a point, I either can't or don't want to work more. So I will substitute something for income. So what does that mean? Substitute something for income. Well, maybe in this $70,000 of after-tax income that I said I needed, maybe there was in that a budgeted amount for going out to dinner, like going out to restaurants, okay? And so maybe in the substitution world where I cannot work any more hours, right? We only have 24 hours in the day. You have to sleep a certain amount. There's only so many hours you can work. So at a point, maybe I decide, instead of needing all of the after-tax income I thought I needed, I can change a behavior and I'm going to say need in quotes a little less income, right? Meaning that if in that $70,000 of income, there was a budget for going out to eat, I could decide, you know what, restaurants aren't that cool. I'm going to find some new recipes and cook in, right? And that would be a little less expensive. So I can change my behavior. I can substitute cooking in for going out to a restaurant, okay? And then I don't necessarily need as much income. Obviously, that is dependent on, the substitution effect is dependent on there being some amount of disposable income, right? If I really need that income to feed my kids and keep my house, then I'm less likely to have any kind of a substitution effect, okay? So that's the income effect and the substitution effect, all right? So let's get back to the question that was asked, all right? So the question that was asked is, if I have $100,000 of taxable income and I'm taxed at 20%, and Congress increases my rate from 20% to 25%, how much more income tax will I pay? And what will this tax rate change due to the tax base and the amount of tax collected? Okay, so let's flip to the next slide. All right. So first off, what did we start out with? Well, we started off with $100,000 taxable income. So that is our tax base, okay? And we were told that our tax rate was 20%, okay? And remember, in our Chapter 1 PowerPoint, we said that taxes, so we can say taxes paid equals our tax base times our tax rate, okay? And so in this situation, our tax base is 100,000. Our tax rate starting out is 20%. So our taxes paid in this scenario is $20,000. And they told us that. They told us that initially we're paying $20,000 in tax, okay? So if our taxes paid on that $100,000, this tax base is pre-tax income, right? So if I earn $100,000 before tax, right, then I pay $20,000 in taxes. My after-tax income is $80,000, okay? So that's our starting point. Our after-tax income is $80,000, all right? And we're told that the income effect is in place. So based on the income effect, we need $80,000 after taxes to afford our lifestyle and regardless of taxes, we will work to earn it, okay? But what do we know? We know if tax rates go up, right? So starting with this $100,000 before taxes, if our average tax rate goes up to 25%, right? If we only make $100,000 before taxes, then we're going to pay $25,000 in taxes, and we will not have $80,000 of after-tax income, which is what we need. We need this $80,000 of after-tax income, okay? So the question is, what amount of pre-tax income do we need if the tax rate is 25% and we need to have $80,000 after taxes. All right? That is what we have to figure out. Okay? Well, luckily, there is a super cool tax formula that helps us do that pretty simply. Okay? And it goes like this. So what it tells us is that after tax income equals pre-tax income times 1 minus the tax rate. And you may be saying, well, Professor McFessel, I don't know that that's right. Well, let's test it, okay? Because we already have a test case, right? We know that our $80,000 of after-tax income, right, equals some amount of pre-tax income. And if we put in our 20%, because we already know the answer to that, right? 1 minus our 20%, okay? We get $80,000 equals pre-tax income times 0.8, right? And so now divide this out. Right? So that means so we just proved that this new fun tax formula actually works because we tested it with numbers that we knew, right? We already knew that if we had $100,000 before taxes and we have a 20% income tax rate, that is going to leave us with $80,000 after tax, and we're going to pay $20,000 of taxes. So we just proved that that formula works. All right, so that's super cool. We just figured out that formula works. So let's use that formula now with our new set of tax rates. Okay, so our formula, after tax income equals pre-tax income times 1 minus the tax rate. All right, we know we have to have $80,000 of after tax to live. That's the income effect. The income effect says we need $80,000 in order to afford our lifestyle. We're willing to work for it. We've got enough hours to where we can work more as tax rates go up. What we need to find is our pre-tax income. We need to know how much salary do I have to negotiate for, right, in order to absorb this new 25% tax rate. Okay? So we work this the same way as we worked it the last time. This is going to be times 0.75, right? So now we just divide our $80,000. We got to do a little bit of algebra here. Okay. And so now our pre-tax income is $106,000 Okay, so that is what we need pre-tax when the tax rate is 25% to have $80,000 after tax, okay? But that's not quite what we've answered a question, right? We now know what our new pre-tax income is, and that's great because that gets us pretty far down the road. But what did the question ask us? Well, let's scroll up and look. Okay. If Congress increases the income tax rate from 20% to 25%, okay, how much more income tax will she pay, assuming that the income effect is descriptive? All right, so we got to figure out how much more tax she would pay. All right, so let's scroll back down. All right, so taxes paid on $100,000 at a 20% tax rate was $20,000. All right. We already figured that out. Taxes paid on $106,000 at 25%, right? So we need to know how much taxes does she pay on $106,000 at 25%. Well, we've got a couple of ways to do this, right? We can take this 106,000, 666.67, multiply it by 0.25, because this is tax base and tax rate, and that's going to equal our taxes, right? And so that's going to give us 26,666.67. All right. So this is our old tax amount here, right? This is our new tax amount here. And so she pays $26,666.67 minus that $20,000 more. So subtract those out. Right? So she pays over $6,000 more in taxes as that tax rate goes up just to have the same amount of after-tax income. And when we're talking about like living expenses and being able to afford our cars, our houses, our lifestyle, food, shoes, whatever, it's after tax that we're concerned about, okay? So she pays over $6,000 more in taxes. So we answered that question, but we still have one more question to answer. So let's go to the next slide. So the last part of the question asks, what effect will this tax rate change have on the tax base and the tax collected? Okay, well, our old tax base was $100,000, right? And our old tax paid was $20,000, right? Our new tax base was $106,000, $666.66. And our new tax paid was $26,000, $666.67. All right. So our tax base increased and our taxes paid increase. So what that tells us is when the income effect is descriptive, tax base and taxes paid, so from a government perspective, tax revenues increase. All right, and that is the end of this practice problem. Thanks, guys.